Hello, welcome back to the channel. It's me, Emmy the Cat Lady, and you join me here in the capital Wasteland, and if you've played Fallout 3, you'll know exactly where I am right now. This is Tenpenny Tower. I thought it'd be interesting to take a look at a more well-known character in the games today, so I think most people that have played Fallout 3 or know much about it is kind of aware of Allistair Tenpenny. But there's a few interesting things about Allistair Tenpenny that might not be immediately obvious if you just go to do the Power of the Atom quest or to do the thing with the ghouls to get the ghoul mask. But there's a few things that I think are interesting about him, so I'm going to talk my way into the tower, hopefully, and get up to see him, and then we'll have a wee chat about things. So I'll see you in just a second. Here we go. So we're now here in Mr. Tenpenny's suite, which is unsurprisingly very fancy. We've got some flowers and plants and some nice rugs. The place looks relatively clean. Nice clean bed, furniture, all looks pretty nice. So Tenpenny is one of the handful of characters in the Fallout games that doesn't have an American accent. So can confirm that he is not American. He's English actually, and his accent is English. There's one thing that kind of bothers me is when people talk about a British accent, because there's a lot of those depending on which part of the United Kingdom you are in. But he has travelled actually. He was born in England in around 2197, and he has travelled across the Atlantic to seek his fortune. But he doesn't really tell you much about what happened in the UK after the bombs fell. So we know from various sources that pre-war Europe, the continent the UK is part of, collapsed before the war between America and China. Just a little side note, because even some British people don't seem to understand the difference here. This is talking about the real world. So the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland is in the continent of Europe. We left the European Union. That's what Brexit was about, was the European Union, which is a union of allied countries that have trade-in deals and things between them and agree on legislation that covers every member state of the European Union. When Brexit happened, we left that union, but that doesn't mean that we've left the continent of Europe. The British Isles are still part of the continental shelf that is Europe. It's worth noting, because I had somebody tell me that because we're a set of islands that we're our own continent, which is baffling, but there are several countries that are not islands that are also not members of the EU, including Switzerland and Norway. And the United Kingdom left the European Union, but we're still part of Europe, and we don't really seem to have any kind of indication that, you know, some form of Brexit happened, because obviously a lot of the Fallout games were created before all that happened. So, but we know that pre-war in the Fallout universe, Europe basically fell apart during the resource wars, largely due to a lot of conflict in the Middle East. Big surprise there. And because of the resource wars, where all the oil was running out and all the fossil fuels were running out, so people started basically fighting over what was left. And then obviously the war between the US and China that started and ended in 2077 with the bombs falling. So even if no nukes were actually dropped on Europe or the UK, the continent's still going to be affected by it, just because of the scale of the attack of the nuclear bombs on America. We know that radiation gets into the water, gets into the soil, gets into the air, essentially, so it's still going to have an impact. So Tenpenny here, he amassed a significant amount of wealth, but there's not really any clear information on exactly how he achieved that when he got here. But he began hiring mercenaries in order to recover valuable tech and valuable items. And you do learn of one such kind of expedition if you do the quest for Mr. Crowley in Underworld, who's a ghoul, and the quest is you got to shoot him in the head, so you have to go and assassinate these people, which he says is because they are racist against ghouls. But if you explore the quest well enough, you learn that basically he wants all the keys so that he can claim the T-51B power armour from Fort Constantine, and this was the exception. So Tenpenny set up this expedition with Dave and Dukov and what's his name, Strayer, and Mr. Crowley to get into Fort Constantine to get the power armour. They didn't manage to do it, so now Crowley wants to collect all the keys and assassinate all the people because he thinks they screwed him over. So that's kind of one of the reasons they might end up coming to see this man, is to carry out that quest. They did lose a few people, and you can find some of the people that died when you go to Fort Constantine yourself. But if you come here and tell Tenpenny that Crowley wants you to assassinate him, then he'll make you a counter offer to assassinate Crowley, and he'll pay you to do that instead. So that's an interesting option. So you can see Mr. Burke's not here and the button's not here because I already on this file completed Power of Atom in the way where we don't destroy Megaton. Yes, let's have a chat with Mr. Tenpenny.
How did you get past the guard? What do you want?
So, yep, you can ask him a few questions. So, tell me about yourself.
Oh, it's impolite for a gentleman to talk about himself, but I'd hope this magnificent tower would speak volumes.
Yeah, so he's like, I don't really want to talk about myself, but let's try compliments. Compliments help. Quite a tower you've got here, Mr. Tenpenny.
Some might say that Tenpenny Tower is my crowning achievement, but no, my dear girl, it is just the beginning.
Okay. So, yeah, that gives us a wee hint that, you know, this tower, with all its wealth and refinement, isn't the end goal, it's just the beginning. So, you can say, do you remember Mr. Crowley?
The ghoul? He's dead. Died 20 years ago. Good riddance, too. I hate those shufflers.
Yeah, so you can say, I'm going to put, yeah, we can do that, or we can just say, how did he die?
Who cares? I hired some mercenaries to get me some equipment from Fort Constantine. He was one of them. Of the 5, only 3 survived. You'll have to ask one of them if you want the gory details.
There we go. So, yep, satisfy my curiosity.
So easily? Somehow I'm not surprised.
Yeah. So that's pretty much all you can get out of him.
Cheerio.
Cheerio. Yeah, that's a very British way of saying goodbye. Cheerio. That's something I've not heard somebody say that for a long time. There we go. So, yep, he says this is just the beginning. So he has grander plans for improving things in the Wasteland. If you talk to Mr. Burke, you can get a wee bit more detail about that from him. But Tenpenny Tower, it's an exclusive settlement with high rent and actually a good quality of life. I say, we look around here, all the furniture's nice and clean. You know, we've got guards sitting there. He's got an entire suite. So, you know, this is a 2-bedroom suite with 1 bath with a very, well, mostly clean bathtub. And that kind of thing. So after the failed attempt to steal the power armour from Fort Constantine, Tenpenny then met Mr. Burke and they began to work together to restore this tower, which was a hotel pre-war. It was a hotel resort kind of a thing. And Burke helped him get things done and find the right class of tenants as far as he was concerned. So obviously only people that are of high quality and have money are welcome here. People that don't have that are not allowed in. So quite exclusive, and he lives quite comfortably off the rent that the other residents pay in the tower. So the guards that are kind of outside and in here on the door and things, oh no, he's gone away for a wander, they're well paid and they're quite happy with their job. So they're kind of a private militia, I guess, that work as guards for Tenpenny Tower. People tend to dress nicely. So the residents, you'll see all the...
You watch yourself. You cause any more trouble and you'll be dead.
I haven't caused any trouble, shut up. But, you know, everything looks nice and clean and you know, the women are all wearing kind of pre-war dresses and stuff like that, and the men are all wearing kind of pre-war casual clothes or suits, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, it's all very nice. There we go. Here's Irving Cheng. You know, so it's obviously they consider it to be quite exclusive, and some of the residents are a bit pompous and condescending and very much anti-ghoul. You can also find out that Tenpenny actually kept slaves, unfortunately. So if you go to Rivet City and you meet May Wong, who's an escaped slave that's worried that Sister is after her, even though he's actually more involved with looking for the escaped synth. And if you talk to her about it, then she really, really doesn't want to be sent back to her previous owner. So she obviously had a bit of a terrible time, but we know that Tenpenny did keep slaves at one point. But one of the interesting things about Tenpenny is that he's become a bit of a recluse. So he has this suite here and he has his balcony, and he doesn't really leave it very often. It's very rare for him to actually leave the suite and go somewhere else, even within the tower. There is a cafe that makes his lunch for him every day, but he tends to have it delivered up to his room instead of going down. Even though he has a table reserved specifically for him, he'll still go down and he'll tend to stay here and eat his meals when they're delivered to him. He also drinks alcohol pretty much constantly, so he gets regular deliveries of that. His lunch is the same thing every day, so that again can be an indication of something that, you know, he doesn't like change, he doesn't like anything different. So he gets an iguana bit sandwich with no salt and a peeled pear every day, and that's what he eats. And he's very particular that that's exactly what it is and that there's no salt added. And he even gets regular visits from Susan Lancaster, who is Tenpenny Tower's in-house sex worker. So I guess we're in a high-class place, so we would probably want to call her an escort, you know, since that's the kind of posh version, so to speak. But yeah, so he even gets that delivered to him on a regular basis. And other than that, he passes the time by kind of sitting out here, drinking, presumably smoking their cigarettes there. And he also has a high-powered sniper rifle, so anything that's moving down below that he doesn't like the look of, he'll take pot shots at from up here, and seems to quite enjoy doing that. Mr. Burke is an interesting character. I might do a separate video on him and some of the details about him, because he's definitely an interesting one. So he's become Tenpenny's right-hand man and has made himself basically indispensable to Tenpenny, and seems to be manipulating Tenpenny as well, because Allistair Tenpenny here, he's a classic eccentric wealthy old man and has no real empathy for other people, which is how we end up with the power of the atom's evil root. So Tenpenny mentioned offhand that he thought Megaton was a bit of an eyesore, so Burke convinced him to agree to detonate the bomb. Tenpenny apparently suggested asking the residents to evacuate, but doesn't really seem to care that much if people are injured or killed in the explosion. And Burke had absolutely no intention of telling the residents of Megaton to evacuate. He has a house there for some reason, but he has no intention of getting people to evacuate, and he just wants the place gone. And it seems to be because Tenpenny offhand just said that he thought Megaton was a bit of an eyesore and he didn't like the way it looked. So that was enough for Burke to say, right, well, let's nuke it. So definitely quite extreme. I'll put a wee clip in of the explosion, but I'm going to take the sound off it because for some reason there was a bit of a copyright issue with it when I was doing it in the crime video in the Wasteland Survival Guide. Apparently somebody's put the dialogue, like the game audio from that, into an album on Spotify without changing anything, so it gave me a bit of a copyright claim. It's all sorted now, but it was a bit of a weird thing that happened there. But yeah, and you know, he's quite happy about the explosion happening and he thinks it's entertaining. So, you know, make of that what you will. So his plan, as I said, he said, yeah, this is just the beginning. So he's got grander plans for the Wasteland, and he wants to clear it out and rebuild it to a nice clean place that's free of aberrations of nature, namely ghouls and mutants. And he says that he hates ghouls, but it's not really a strong hatred. It's more just that he shows contempt for them, and he's just like, I don't really care. Because if you can convince the other residents about the ghouls moving into the tower, he will say, yeah, that's fine, as long as they pay and they follow the rules. But he's quite delighted by the idea of being able to hunt them down and kill them if they break the rules. So there's that. Yeah, he's an interesting one. According to the game, he is considered an evil character. He drops a finger if you have the Lawbringer perk. And he is quite old. This is estimated to have been born in 2197, so that makes him 80 years old, which is quite an achievement in the Fallout world. But he does seem to have a little bit of indication that he might have some dementia, and it does seem like it's Mr. Burke that's pulling the strings in the background and kind of manipulating him in order to achieve things. But he's not an essential character, so you can kill him at pretty much any point, whether you're doing the quest for Crowley or not. It's also possible for him to be killed by somebody else, depending on your choices in the game. And the main thing is that if you get the ghouls moved into the tower and you come back later, you'll find Tenpenny's body's been stuffed into a storage closet because he had a disagreement with Roy Phillips. And if you know that quest, you know that if you get the ghouls into the tower, whichever way you do it, all the non-ghoul people do end up deceased. So, but particularly Roy Phillips takes out Tenpenny and shoves him in a closet. So there you go. But I think he's quite an interesting character because he's an older character.
Hello. I can't stop to chat just now.
Sure. He's an older man and has thrived quite a long time in this unforgiving, bleak wasteland where there's danger around every corner. He has achieved quite a lot, but he's kind of ruthless in some ways and doesn't really care that much about people unless they can kind of give him some kind of value. So it does seem like many other wealthy people, he's amassed this amount of wealth by exploiting other people. But it could also be true that Mr. Burke is exploiting Tenpenny and manipulating him. But he lacks a lot of empathy for other people. He only cares about what value they can bring to him. And the fact that you can nuke an entire city and kill a bunch of people just because he doesn't like looking at it in the distance. And he enjoys the view. He's quite delighted and entertained by the mushroom cloud, and he doesn't really care that much about how many people might be killed or harmed by it. And Mr. Burke, obviously, he wants to destroy Megaton as well for his own reasons. But he's also quite reclusive, so whether that's paranoia that somebody might actually harm him to steal his money, so he doesn't leave his rooms, and he has a guard posted outside, and he has all his food and booze and sex delivered to him on a platter, essentially, like room service in a hotel, and he just stays here and shoots at things from his tower and takes money from people to use. But he apparently does have plans to kind of improve things across the wasteland and build his own little empire. So yeah, it's an interesting one. But the reclusiveness, it could be down to paranoia. That's certainly a problem. The fact that, if you're not on official orders from like Mr. Burke to come here and speak and come out here, then you have to kind of speech check your way in. You have to lie and say that, Tenpenny wants to see you, but once you speak to him, he's kind of like, okay, fine, let's chat, and he doesn't really seem to be fussed about it. But it's obvious that he doesn't really want to leave this apartment that he's staying in. He's quite happy to just stay, and he's got the money to throw around just to have everything brought to him, so that he doesn't really need to leave. So there could be some reasons for that, and potentially some kind of, mental health disorder, or we could be looking at, some kind of neurodegenerative dementia kind of a thing. With his age, that kind of makes sense as well. And it's not often that you encounter people that are, elderly like this in Fallout. You find people that tend to be, you know, maybe up to their 30s, 40s, that kind of thing most often, or people that have been around for a couple of hundred years because they've done something to, or something's happened to them that unnaturally extends their lifespan, whereas he's just reached 80 years old, and possibly part of it is because he has been a recluse for the last few years, and then he's in less danger because he's not out adventuring through the wasteland and coming up against raiders and deathclaws and whatnot. But you know, it's an interesting one, and the fact that he has travelled transatlantic, which isn't something that seems to be particularly common. It's nice to hear, you know, accents, different accents, and people that have come from other places. But you know, the question would be how did he travel from England to the US? What did he use to get across the Atlantic? Because there's not really any planes going around. And obviously the Brotherhood have got their airships, and the Enclave have got the vertibirds and all that kind of thing, but vertibirds don't seem like they're really up to crossing the Atlantic, because it's quite a distance. It's quite a distance. But maybe there's ships that are still able to get through. It's hard to say, and he's not really willing to talk about himself, so there's not really a way of kind of gleaning that information from him, which is probably on purpose, because you know, there's not really much talk about how things, you know, the nuclear war that happened and how it affects the rest of the world. Everything in the games is very much focused on the United States and different parts of the United States, which is really, really interesting. But it's nice to have a couple of characters that have come from outside the US, because you know, it does tell us that maybe there is still people alive in the UK and Europe and Australia, you know, in the Far East, in Japan, China, you know, what's actually happened over there. But you do have the odd person, so obviously Tenpenny's English and he crossed the Atlantic. Colin Moriarty in Megaton is Irish, so it seems like he might have also crossed the Atlantic, and then you've got Raul in Fallout New Vegas, who came up from Mexico, which obviously not surprising that somebody could walk from Mexico up to Nevada at some point as a ghoul. But it's interesting that there is, you know, at least rarely, but there is some transatlantic travel possible. And then this man has come here and exploited a bunch of people, made a fortune, and is now living his best life, whoever it happens to hurt along the way. So that's Tenpenny. He's an interesting man, and I think it'd be good to dig into Mr. Burke as well, because he is, I would say in some ways he's definitely more evil than Tenpenny, because he really seems to want to destroy Megaton and the people of Megaton for his own ends, and he's obviously manipulating Tenpenny to some degree, again for his own ends. So it's interesting to know what he's got in mind, of what his actual, you know, plan and intentions are. So yeah, that'll be the subject for another video, but that's all from me for today, and that's all from Mr. Tenpenny here. So thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed. As always, I love to hear your thoughts in the comments, and we'll see you next time. Bye.